"You think this is funny, Tessa? Walking in here like you belong?" The words hit her like cold water. "I know what you've done, and I want you gone, all of you." She had heard his voice shift like that before, slow, deliberate, the kind of calm that means the decision has already been made. But this time, she was the one who had chosen to walk through that door. This time, she had arrived on her own terms. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to go back to the morning 2 years earlier, when everything she thought she had built dissolved in the space of a single phone call. Tessa Marlowe was 34 years old when her husband of 9 years asked her to leave. She had been standing at the kitchen counter in their house in Oakville, Ontario, cutting apple slices for their daughter's lunch, when Reed's number lit up her phone. He was supposed to be at a site meeting. He knew she would be home. That was the first thing that didn't feel right. "I need you to listen," he said. "No greeting, no hey. I've been seeing someone. It's been going on for a while, and I know I want to pursue it. I think we should separate." There was a pause on his end, the kind that meant he had rehearsed this and had expected a different reaction. She set down the knife very carefully. She could hear the neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the street. She could hear Lily in the next room chattering to herself the way 5-year-olds do when they are completely absorbed in something and the whole world is still safe. "How long?" Tessa asked. A pause. 14 months. She said nothing. "Tessa, don't." The word came out quietly, not with tears, with a specific, measured recognition. 14 months. While she had been volunteering at Lily's school, reorganizing his firm's financial records when his assistant went on leave, making lunches, attending his clients' holiday dinners, smiling beside him at the right moments. 14 months. "I'll stay in a hotel tonight," he said. "We should talk about Lily." She hung up, picked the knife back up, finished cutting the apple slices, arranged them in a small bowl, called Lily for lunch. The crying came later, at 11:30 that night, on the bathroom floor with the fan on, so Lily couldn't hear. Reed Marlowe had grown up wealthy, in the way that makes people careless. His family owned Marlowe Contracting, one of the largest residential development firms in the Greater Toronto area. He had married Tessa when she was still working as an interior designer, with her own small client list, her own ambitions, her own quiet confidence in her eye for space and light and what made a house feel like a place someone actually wanted to live in. He had been charming, then gradually less so. The comments came in stages. Her work was niche. Her clients were not the right level. It would be better, more efficient, if she focused on Lily and on supporting what he was building. He said it like it was logical, like she was being offered something. She had believed him for longer than she wanted to admit. By the time she found out about Renata, 29, junior architect at a firm Reed's company frequently contracted, Tessa had not taken a paying client in 2 years. Her portfolio website had lapsed. Her professional contacts had grown politely distant. She had become, over 9 quiet years, entirely economically dependent on a man who had already replaced her in his mind. The settlement was handled by Reed's family lawyer. She got the legal minimum, shared custody of Lily, a modest monthly support that covered the basics if she was careful and nothing broke. She found a 2-bedroom apartment in Burlington. Ground floor. The radiator clicked all winter. Lily cried the first week. Then she discovered the front steps every afternoon, and she named it Mr. Buttons and left it a piece of cheese, and children find footholds in the most unexpected places. Tessa started over. She did not have the luxury of doing it dramatically. She had Lily on Tuesdays, Thursdays, every other weekend, and every Wednesday for dinner. She built her schedule around those fixed points, the way you build a house around the things that cannot move. The first 3 months, she took every small contract she could find. A retired couple in Hamilton who wanted their basement redesigned, a dentist's office in Mississauga that needed the waiting room rethought. Work that didn't match what she had been trained to do, but work that reminded her she still could, that her instincts hadn't gone anywhere. They had just been waiting, unused, patient in the way good things often are when they have nowhere to go. She started a newsletter. She called it What a Room Knows. It was quiet, honest writing about design and about what makes a space feel inhabited rather than occupied, about the difference between a house that has been staged and a home that has been lived in. about light, about the small choices, a window seat, the direction a bed faces, whether a kitchen asks you to linger or to leave, that determine how a family feels inside the rooms they spend their lives in. The first issue went to 31 subscribers. Most of them were people she knew personally. That was fine. She wrote it like it mattered anyway. By the 8th month, she had 400 subscribers and 3 unsolicited referrals from strangers who had read it and reached out. By the end of the first year, What a Room Knows had 11,000 readers across Canada and the northern United States. Architecture schools in Vancouver and Montreal were sharing her writing in their programs. A non-profit housing organization in Winnipeg reached out. Could she consult on their affordable housing redesign project? They had limited budget but significant reach. She said yes. His name was Callum. No, his name was Wesley Vance. And the first time he emailed her, she almost missed it. She had been answering messages on her phone during Lily's skating lesson, standing at the edge of the rink with her coat tight, watching her daughter surf over the ice with the focused determination of someone who has decided she will master this thing by sheer will alone. The email came from a WV Development Group address. I've followed. What a Room Knows for 6 months, it read. We're planning our next phase of development, mixed income residential, community-centered design. I believe your framework is precisely what we've been missing. I'd like to talk. Short, professional, no flattery, no pitch. She Googled him standing at the rink boards. WV Development Group was not small. Wesley Vance was 41, founder and CEO, with projects in Toronto, Calgary, and Halifax. He had won 2 national awards for sustainable urban development. His company had a reputation, she read in a Globe and Mail profile from the previous year, for doing things slowly and doing them right. He was photographed in that profile looking slightly inconvenienced by the camera, as if the whole photo session had been someone else's idea. She typed back, I'd be open to a conversation. She had expected the call to feel like a pitch meeting. She had braced herself for that specific energy, the assured lean of someone who already knows he will get what he came for. She had been in enough rooms with men like that, Reed's clients mostly, to recognize it within the first 30 seconds. Wesley Vance did not have that energy. He asked her, in the first 10 minutes, why she had chosen the word inhabited over occupied in her 3rd newsletter. He had clearly read it. He had read several of them. He listened to her answer without interrupting. He pushed back thoughtfully on one point, not to correct her, but because he was genuinely interested in whether she had thought about the counter-argument. 45 minutes later, she realized the conversation had extended well past what she had scheduled, and she hadn't noticed. You make people think about what a space is for, he said near the end. Most designers I've worked with think about what a space looks like. That's different, she said. It's the only thing that ever interested me. There was a brief pause. I can tell, he said. And in the way he said it, there was no performance, just the plain, uncomplicated meaning of someone telling you something true. Within 3 weeks, they had a formal consulting contract. She was brought on as lead design consultant for WV Development Group's Hamilton project. 64 units of mixed-income housing designed around actual community patterns rather than a developer's abstract idea of what community should look like. She told herself it was strictly professional. She was not convincing herself. 4 weeks before the night, everything changed. To walk a site near the waterfront she had been researching for him. It was a gray October afternoon, the lake flat and pewter-colored, Lily at Reed's for the week. After the site walk, they sat in a coffee shop on Brant Street with project drawings spread across the table and 2 cups of something warm going cold at the edges because they kept forgetting to drink them. At some point, the drawings had been pushed aside. At some point, they were simply talking about the Winnipeg project, about what cities owe the people who built them, about what Lily had said the previous Thursday that had made Tessa laugh until she had to set down her glass. Wesley asked questions about Lily with the specific attention of someone who understood that this was not a peripheral part of her life. He didn't perform interest, he simply had it. When they finally stood to leave, he held the door and said very quietly, "You're doing something worth doing, Tessa. I want you to know I see that." She looked at him. "I know," he said. "I just mean it. She drove home in the dark with the radio off. Her heart was very loud in the quiet. The invitation arrived the following week in a thick envelope with the Marlowe contracting logo embossed in dark blue on the upper left corner. Inside, cream cardstock, gold print, the kind of stationery you choose when you want people to understand how well things are going for you. Reed's wedding. Renata, a venue in King City, 6 weeks' time. And at the bottom, in Reed's handwriting, she knew it still. After everything, the way you know a scar, a personal note on a separate card. I thought you should see this. You always said I'd never commit. R. She read it twice, set it down, left it on the kitchen counter. Then she smiled. Not a wounded smile, not a bitter one. The kind that means the person holding the weapon has drastically underestimated the target. When Wesley saw the envelope during his next site visit, she hadn't planned to mention it. He noticed it because she had forgotten it was there. He picked it up, read the printed card, then the handwritten note, and set it back down very carefully. "I'll come with you," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not suggesting it for any reason except that you shouldn't walk into that room alone." He looked up then. "You deserve to walk in with someone who actually knows who you are." There was a long pause. "Wesley, I know," he said quietly. "I just mean it." She didn't answer with words. Some things are too full for them. But first, he took her somewhere. There was a community center in Hamilton she hadn't visited since the project's early consultation phase. Wesley had arranged a small gathering, residents who had been involved in the design process, families who had moved into the first completed units. He hadn't told her about it in advance. When she walked through the door, a woman she recognized from an early consultation meeting crossed the room and took both of her hands. "My daughter sleeps better," the woman said. "I know that sounds small, but she has anxiety, and since we moved in, the light, the way her room faces, the quiet, she sleeps. You did that." A man from across the room nodded. He had been one of the most skeptical voices in the early sessions, resistant to the whole process, certain that developers listened only until the cameras were gone. He found her near the end of the evening and shook her hand without saying much. "Just you stayed." On the drive back along the Lake Shore Highway, Tessa was quiet for a long time. The lights of Burlington moved past the window on her left. She held her own hands in her lap. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked. Wesley kept his eyes on the road. "Because I wanted you to walk into that room on Saturday having just remembered who you actually are." A pause. "Before you walked into a room with someone who spent 9 years trying to make you forget." She looked at the side of his face in the dark. He glanced over. Just a second. Something passed between them that neither of them named yet, but they both felt it land. She turned back to the window then. Her heart was very loud. The morning of the wedding, she woke at 5:45. She lay still for a moment, pressing inward, the way you check a bruise to find its depth. What she found was not nerves. What she found was clarity, the feeling of a woman who has located herself after a long time of being lost and has stopped apologizing for having wandered. The dress was a deep emerald green, silk charmeuse that moved when she moved, calm when she was calm, long, simply cut, with a neckline that was elegant rather than declarative. She had chosen it 2 weeks earlier at a small boutique on James Street North in Hamilton, not because it would make a statement, but because she put it on and it felt like her. Unhurried, exactly herself. At her ears, a pair of simple gold drops that had been her mother's. She stood before the mirror, not rehearsing, not performing, just looking. "You're still here," she said quietly to her reflection. Not in surprise, in acknowledgement. Wesley arrived at noon. She opened the door. He wore a dark charcoal suit, collar open at the top, and he took one look at her and stopped entirely in the doorway. "Tessa," he said, "just her name. The way you say something you mean carefully. You look extraordinary." He offered his arm when they reached the car and she took it, and they drove north through the October landscape. The trees still holding some of their color, the sky enormous and pale, in the quiet comfort of two people who have stopped needing to fill the silence. The venue was exactly what Reed had always wanted. Sprawling stone property in King City, immaculate grounds, a valet, 2 photographers, the whole architecture of performance, 300 guests, Reed at the center of it. Renata beside him in ivory silk and the kind of satisfied smile that belongs to a man who has convinced himself he deserves everything he has. He didn't see Tessa come in until the murmuring started. It moved through the room in that specific way, a ripple, heads turning, a shift in attention that the host always notices. Reed turned toward the entrance with the casual confidence of someone expecting something manageable. He found Tessa. In the next 5 seconds, she watched his face move through recognition, through confusion, and into something else, something uncomfortable and complicated that he would spend a long time trying not to name. Because the woman standing at his entrance did not match the image he had kept of her. He had kept a specific one. The woman from the phone call in the kitchen, slightly stunned, economically diminished, occupying a smaller and smaller space in the world as a natural consequence of having been left by him. That had been the logic. That had been the expectation. The woman standing in the entrance was wearing dark green silk and a pair of her mother's earrings and the complete unhurried confidence of someone who has built something and knows it and no longer needs anyone's confirmation. She looked younger than he remembered, lighter, like those years had not been spent diminishing her but clarifying her. His champagne glass lowered. Then the whispers reached him from the nearest tables. Is that Wesley Vance from WV Development here? What is her name? She runs that design platform. What a room knows. She's been doing the Hamilton housing project. She's his lead consultant? Or, look at how he's standing. Every word arrived like a separate reckoning. Something contracted in Reed's chest. Pure, clean, humiliating recognition of what it looked like from the outside. Tessa, here, like this, with a man who moved through rooms the way Wesley Vance moved through rooms, not with the performance, with the specific gravity of someone who does not need to prove anything to anyone in the building. Across the room, Tessa said something quiet. Wesley tilted his head and smiled. Low, private, belonging entirely to the two of them. Reed had kept the handwritten note short on purpose. He had imagined this moment playing differently. He had imagined her arriving worn, or worse, brave in a way that would confirm her diminishment, that specific, painful bravery of someone trying hard. He had imagined watching from across a room and feeling large. Instead, she had walked into his wedding and occupied the room without trying, the way a color occupies a space, completely and without announcement. He looked away, looked back. There was no version of this evening that ended the way he had planned it. What none of the 300 guests knew, what Reed himself had only suspected in the blurred, convenient way of a man who prefers not to look directly at certain things, was what Renata's background actually involved. Her full name was Renata Voss Chambers. Before she met Reed, she had worked as a procurement specialist for a Toronto area real estate investment group, and over the course of 22 months had diverted just over $3 million in client acquisition fees into a layered series of holding accounts that took forensic auditors nearly a year to fully map. She had left the firm before the audit completed, changed cities, found a new social world, found Reed, who was charming and wealthy, and importantly, asked few questions about the years before they met. A portion of Marlowe Contracting's most recent development financing had been structured, quietly, technically, plausibly, around funds that traced back through Renata's intermediary accounts, clean on the surface, rotten 4 layers down. The RCMP had been looking for Renata Voss Chambers for 16 months. They found her at her own wedding reception. The string quartet was playing something soft and celebratory when the officers came through the side entrance. 4 of them, plainclothes, quiet and efficient the way people are. When they have done this before, and understand that theatrics serve no one, the music stopped one instrument at a time until the room was completely silent. Every head turned. Renata was escorted from the bridal suite still in her gown, ivory silk, cathedral train, a veil that had cost $4,000, and now swept across the ballroom floor between 2 officers. She walked with the careful composure of someone holding a fracture together through sheer concentration. She passed through the center of the room. An officer approached Reed, Mr. Marlowe. Very quiet, very clear. We have reason to believe that certain financial instruments connected to Marlowe Contracting's recent Lakeshore North development have ties to funds obtained through fraud. You are asked to come with us for questioning. This is my wedding, he said, with the full force of a man who has lived his entire life in rooms where that kind of statement made things stop. Sir, the officer's tone did not change. Please come with us. Near the center of the room, Renata had stopped walking. Perhaps she could have kept moving. Perhaps she could have maintained the composure all the way through the doors, but she stopped, and she turned, and she looked across the room, past the flower arrangements, past the stunned photographer still holding his camera, past the empty aisle, until she found Tessa. She looked at her for a long moment, and then, very quietly, more to herself than to anyone. She's nothing like he said. Tessa heard it. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The doors closed. Reed stood at the front of the ceremony space in his bespoke suit with the ring on the table beside him and the understanding, arriving slowly the way catastrophic things sometimes do, that he had engineered all of this, every part of it, the leaving, the financing, the handwritten note on the invitation, the careful, sustained effort to make himself look large and leave her looking small. He had built it all, and now it was returning to him in front of 300 people who would spend the next several years discussing quietly what they had seen. He turned, found Tessa. She held his gaze, not with cruelty, not with softness, with the particular steadiness of a woman who has already done her grieving and her healing and has arrived somewhere he cannot follow. Tessa, he said, just her name. The way you say a word when it's the only one left. She didn't answer. Some silences are complete. That one was. The room held its breath for a long moment, and then Wesley Vance moved. He walked to the center of the ballroom, unhurried, and stood there with the calm of a man who knows exactly where he is and has decided to be entirely himself in it. The murmuring stopped. He looked at Tessa, only at Tessa. I had something I was going to say. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I've been revising it for about 3 weeks, and I still don't think it's right. He paused. But I think I'd rather say imperfect things to the right person than perfect things to no one. Tessa went very still. Tessa. He said it the way he always said her name, like it was something he was careful with. I have loved watching you build something from nothing. I've loved watching you refuse to disappear. I love the way you talk about Lily and the way you argue with me about design methodology, and the way you laugh when something is actually funny and not just when you think it's expected. He reached into his jacket pocket. I love you. Every version of you I've known. Every version I haven't met yet. He held out a ring, yellow gold, simple and warm, with a single stone that caught the light in a way that was quiet rather than loud, like something chosen for a specific person rather than for an impression. I'm aware, he said, and a small, dry smile appeared, that this is technically someone else's wedding venue. Tessa laughed. It came out of her before she could do anything about it, and it was real, surprised and full and relieved and overwhelmingly, completely itself. You know I'm not going to say no, she said. The room erupted. A minister, a family friend of the Marlowe family who had been standing at the altar with no idea how to proceed for the past 15 minutes, stepped forward with the quietly collected expression of a man who has learned that life is rarely the ceremony and almost always the interruption. There does seem to be, he said carefully, a wedding still to be performed, if the relevant parties are willing. We don't have a license, Tessa said, slightly breathless. Wesley reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced a marriage license, complete, signed, dated, entirely in order. She stared at it. Since Tuesday, he said. I wasn't certain, but I was fairly certain. She laughed again. She couldn't stop. It rose out of her and filled the whole enormous room, and 300 people who had come expecting someone else's wedding laughed with her, because some things are simply contagious in the best possible way. When it quieted, she straightened her dress, looked at the minister, looked back at Wesley, the man who had found her in the middle of rebuilding and had never once suggested she was anything less than entirely worth finding. Let's do this, she said. The ceremony took 12 minutes. The vows were old and entirely true. Wesley spoke quietly, his eyes on hers and nowhere else. Tessa's voice wavered once, and she let it because she had spent enough years trying to be small and still and inoffensive, and this was not a moment for managing herself. When the minister said the words that have been said at the end of every real wedding since words existed, The room went louder than anything Tessa had heard in a long time. She barely registered it. She was looking at Wesley, who was looking at her with the expression of a man who cannot quite believe his luck, and has decided to be completely honest about that. The kiss was soft, not performed, not for the room. When they stepped apart, she held his face in her hands for a moment and just looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He turned and pressed his lips to her palm, warm still, entirely certain. "Thank you," he said back, and in those two small words exchanged twice was everything. Every night she had studied after Lily went to sleep. Every morning she had made herself get up. Every time she had chosen, quietly and without audience, to keep going. All of it arriving, at last, exactly where it was meant to. The story moved the way honest things do. Quietly at first, then further, then everywhere. By the following morning it was being shared with one line. "You need to read this." By the end of the week it had traveled far enough that a journalist in Halifax who had covered WV Development Group's housing projects reached out to Tessa about a feature for a national magazine. She said yes. The RCMP investigation into Renata Voss Chambers was thorough and charged with deliberate fraud. The investigation confirmed he had not known the full structure. But negligence has its own consequences, and the courts do not look kindly on willful incuriosity. He received a suspended sentence and a fine that required the quiet sale of certain assets. Whether those months changed him is a question only he can answer. Some men emerge from humiliation diminished. Some emerge clearer. The witnesses to that ballroom afternoon would say, charitably, that they hoped for the latter. Renata served her sentence. Those who knew her from before said afterward that she seemed, in some undefendable way, more honest with herself by the end of it. Whether that was growth or simply the particular relief of not having to hold a story together anymore, it was hard to say. What a Room Knows grew beyond anything Tessa had planned. She spoke at the Canadian Institute of Planners conference. She co-designed a community housing pilot in Winnipeg that became a national case study. She wrote a book, The Inhabited House, which sat on the Globe and Mail's bestseller list for 9 weeks and was adopted by 3 university design programs before the end of its first year. She came home every time. Home to Wesley, who had understood early that the most useful thing he could do was believe in her and make sure the coffee was ready when she came back from things. Who kissed her temple the moment she walked through the door, every single time without variation, like a small and daily declaration he never grew tired of making. Home to Lily, who had taken to Wesley not in a dramatic moment but gradually, the way children accept things that are genuinely good. First with caution, then with ease, then with the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who has simply moved past the decision. One Saturday afternoon he was helping her with a school project about community spaces, and at some point she said, without looking up, "You're actually good at this stuff." He had said nothing. He had smiled and kept working. Some things don't need marking. Lily called him Wes on the 3rd weekend and Dad Wes by the time she was 8, and never revisited the question of whether it fit. On evenings when he and Tessa danced in the kitchen, slowly, unhurried, thinking no one was watching, Lily would appear in the doorway in her socks, observe them with the serious pleasure of someone watching something she approves of, and then wander off again. A year after the wedding, on an ordinary Wednesday morning, Tessa sat across from Wesley at the kitchen table and held a mug of tea she couldn't seem to finish and told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set down what he was holding, crossed the kitchen, and pulled her into him without words, his arms around her completely, his lips against her hair, staying there. "We're going to need a bigger dining table," he said finally, into her curls. She laughed against his chest, the kind of laugh that has relief in it and joy, and the mild absurdity of how unexpected the good things turn out to be. He pulled back just enough to look at her, really look, then kissed her softly. The kind that isn't asking for anything, the kind that simply means, "I am so glad it's you." Their son arrived in June. The nights went long, the mornings were better than best. On the difficult nights, and there were difficult nights, Wesley appeared in the doorway without being called, always, and took the baby and pressed a kiss to Tessa's forehead so she could breathe. Just that, just enough. That is the whole truth of a beautiful life. Nobody tells you that it comes with both. You wouldn't trade either part. One evening, years later, Tessa stood at the back window of their house in Hamilton and watched the yard. Lily was explaining something to her little brother with enormous authority, gesturing widely, and he was following her around with the complete devotion of a person who has decided that this particular person is the one worth listening to. The sun was going sideways through the maple. The yard smelled like cut grass and October. Wesley came to stand behind her. He didn't say anything. He put his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder, and they watched together. She turned her face toward his. He kissed her cheek. Slow, deliberate, the way you do something you intend to keep doing. She thought about the woman who had left of lapsed contacts, and a quiet, furious promise made to herself in the dark. This is not the end of me. She found that woman with tenderness. You were never the problem, she thought. You were always where this was heading. Wesley's arms tightened around her. Just slightly, just enough. She covered his hands with hers. It was enough. It was everything. It was home.